There is a part of Rahab's story that I don't think we talk about enough. We talk about the spies, we talk about the Scarlet Cord, we talk about the walls of Jericho falling, we even talk about how Rahab and her family survived. But what happened the morning after? Because Rahab survived, right? But everything she knew was gone. Her city was gone, her environment she was used to was gone, and the life she understood was gone. And now she had to figure out who she was going to become after surviving the destruction of the world she once knew. And while Rahab's story is not a story about narcissistic abuse, the part of her story that made me think about that is what I see in women after destructive relationships. Everybody talks about leaving. You can hear things like, you just need to get out. You deserve better. Listen, girl, don't go back. Or guy, don't go back, bro. But we don't talk nearly enough about what happens after you survive. Because leaving that type of relationship doesn't automatically remove the fact that the relationship is still left something inside of you. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because what happened when your Jericho is falling, but you're still standing, is where we need to focus on. When you spent a long time in a controlling, emotionally abusive, or narcissistic relationship, you learn how to survive inside of that environment, right? You start paying attention to things other people may not even notice. A facial expression, a change in tone, the way somebody closes a door, how long it takes for them to respond, or whether they remain quiet, or maybe it's the fact that they're too quiet. You learn something is different. I need to figure out what this is. And your nervous system becomes a really good detector at potential dangers. And in those relationships, that may have helped you survive. But there's a problem. And the problem is that your body doesn't necessarily know that the relationship is over. Just because the relationship ended, your nervous system keeps responding. You can leave a person and still carry those survival patterns within you. And now somebody can not text you back and your mind starts filling in the blanks, or someone is upset with you and you immediately wonder what you did. Listen, someone who treats you well and instead of just relaxing, you're suspicious. What is that? What do they want? Those are the things that may be crossing your mind. Things are peaceful, but peace itself feels strange to you. And because your nervous system has got accustomed to some unpredictability, the relationship may be over, but internally, you're still listening for the walls to start shaking, for your world to start crumbling. And listen, that is what made me think about Rahab differently. Because before Jericho fell, Rahab had been instructed to place her scarlet cord in the window. And that cord identified her household as the one that was supposed to be spared. And I started thinking about that symbol psychologically, not as a theological interpretation of the cord, but as an image. Because after a relationship has stripped away pieces of your identity, one of the hardest questions becomes, how do I find myself again? Not who was I with when I was not with them. Not who had I become just to keep the peace. Not the version of yourself who is always constantly explaining, defending, anticipating, apologizing, or trying to prevent the next conflict. What is the scarlet cord? What helps you to recognize yourself again? Maybe it's your voice. Maybe it's your boundaries. Maybe it's reconnecting with people you became isolated from being in that relationship. Or maybe it's going back to something you loved even before the relationship that you had to give up. I want you to think about it. Was it about making a decision without needing someone else's approval that makes you feel empowered? Sometimes rebuilding begins with the very small moments of, wait, I get to choose this. What am I scared of? Ain't nobody gonna do nothing to me. I got this. And this is one of the biggest aftermaths I want women to understand when we're referencing things like when you leave a relationship and you don't trust yourself. I experienced repeated manipulation, gaslighting, blame shifting, and having my own perception challenged. Eventually, I started asking myself questions about my own internal experience because I was hearing, you're being too sensitive. You're remembering it wrong. Maybe because I caused this, I was thinking, or maybe I'm the problem. And then you leave and then everybody's saying, trust yourself. But okay, how do I do that? Which self? The one that was always conformed or the other one? Because the person who used to make decisions confidently may feel so far away and I felt so distant from myself. But that's why rebuilding means self-trust usually isn't a giant decision. It's a series of smaller experiences. Now, you get to make a decision. You can tolerate discomfort and you can realize who survived the outcome. And your brain begins to collect new evidence. Can I make sound decisions? Can I recognize when something doesn't feel right? And can I say no? And that be a sentence, right? Can I change my mind? Of course you can, but why do I feel like I'm going to disappoint people and I not be okay? Can I protect my peace without explaining myself for 3 hours to someone? Listen, that's rebuilding when you say, of course I can stop doing those things. Yes. Here's another thing I want you to hear. Some of the things that you don't like about yourself right now may be originally developed because you were trying to survive a hostile environment, toxicity. And now you're hypervigilant, oversight looking. You may be over explaining things. You may be even struggling to make decisions. And maybe you're constantly reading into people's moods. If a conflict makes your entire body react and you feel like you need to apologize constantly, or you're having a hard time receiving kindness without wondering if this other shoe is going to drop and there's something else that's going to come up, I don't want you to romanticize those patterns, because if they're inferring things in your life, then maybe that's what needs to change. And understanding why they're there is a very different aspect from shaming yourself for having them. So instead of saying or asking what is wrong with me, why don't you try this? What did I learn that I needed to do to survive in that environment then? And do I still need that here? That's how you contrast that. Because maybe that's a completely different conversation. Because healing isn't necessarily declaring war on the version of who you think you need to be when you survive. Sometimes healing is thinking or thanking her for getting you here and teaching her that she doesn't have to run anywhere anymore. You're free now. I especially want to talk to the woman who thought leaving would immediately make her feel better. I was there and it didn't. And maybe it hasn't for you. Maybe you left and you're feeling lonely, financially overwhelmed, even angry. How about embarrassed, even exhausted? Maybe you're co-parenting with this person still. Oh, Lord, I know. And maybe you're trying to rebuild friendships, or maybe you're even trying to figure out who you are. Maybe you're grieving the years you feel like you lost being with that person. But listen, I want you to know you got out. That's the uncomfortable thought. And why don't you feel free? Because freedom and feeling safe aren't always simultaneous. Sometimes freedom comes first, and then your mind and body has to learn that that freedom feels like safety. And that's the rebuilding period. And unfortunately, rebuilding doesn't always feel inspirational. Sometimes rebuilding feels like you crying in your car, or sometimes it's like blocking a number, or not responding to a message that's trying to trigger you. I know, white knuckle it. Sometimes it's realizing that you don't owe someone access to you simply because they're upset. And sometimes it's sitting alone on a Friday night wondering, did you make the right decision by not going out? I know, I've been there. Sometimes it's waking up in the morning and realizing I haven't thought about them at all today. And that's a good thing. And that counts. And that's freedom. This is where I want to come back to Rahab, because Jericho fell. But Rahab's identity did not remain trapped inside of that Jericho rubble. No, Joshua tells us that Rahab and her family survived and lived among Israel. And that if we follow this biblical story forward, Matthew reminds us later that Rahab is included in the genealogy of Jesus. Her story keeps going. And the piece I want women to rebuild after abuse that they're holding on to is that destruction is one chapter that does not get to narrate the rest of your life. And please hear this and please hear what I'm not saying. I'm not telling you everything happens for a reason. I'm not. I'm not telling you that the abuse was necessary. And I'm not telling you to be grateful for what someone did for you. I am definitely not telling you that. Suffering automatically makes us stronger. I'm saying something much more simpler. What happened to you does not have to become the boundary around who you are allowed to become next. There's a difference. Yeah, there's a difference. So what does rebuilding actually look like? I think one of the biggest shifts is moving from how do I keep myself from getting hurt again, to eventually asking, what kind of life do I actually want moving forward? Those are different questions. Protection matters, boundaries matter, and learning red flags matter. But if we're not careful, the person who hurt us can continue to shape our lives long after they're gone, because every decision becomes organized around avoiding another version of them. And I don't want my entire life built around what I'm running from. Eventually, I need something I'm moving towards. Peace, friendship, purpose, creativity, healthy love, financial stability, faith. joy, whatever that looks like for you. Recovery isn't only learning how to recognize dangerous people. It's also learning how to participate in a life where you no longer have to organize yourself around danger. So I want to leave you with this exercise. Ask yourself, what did that relationship teach me I had to become? What did that relationship teach me about me I had to become in order to survive? And then I want you to write it down. Maybe it says I had to stay quiet. I had to keep everyone happy. I couldn't trust my feelings. I had to anticipate everything. My needs caused problems. All of those. But I want you to write underneath that, what do I want to learn now that I'm no longer living there? And maybe it sounds like I can use my voice. Someone else's disappointment doesn't automatically mean I've done something wrong. I can listen to my body. I don't have to explain every boundary that I have in place. And yes, my needs are information, not inconveniences. And when peace doesn't mean something bad has to happen, it can mean it's become a part of my scarlet cord. And something that reminds me of this is that I don't have to live there anymore. The abuse is over. And listen, Rahab survived the fall of Jericho, but her story doesn't end at the wall. Neither does yours. Mine's didn't. And maybe right now, you're still standing in the aftermath. Maybe you're looking around thinking, I don't even know where to start. Listen, start small. One boundary, one decision, one safe relationship, one moment of listening to yourself. Because one day where you don't abandon yourself to keep everyone else comfortable, because you're not trying to become the person you once were before in that toxic relationship. You live too much for that. You're building the version of you who understands what happened and recognizes that she learned what to do to survive, and now she gets to decide what she wants to carry forward. And that's what this channel is about. Not pretending that hard things didn't happen, not allowing them to become our entire identity either. Understanding your patterns, learning safety, rebuilding trust, self-trust, and creating a life where survival isn't your full-time job. If you're in the rebuilding season, subscribe and become a part of this community. I want you to answer one question in the comments. What is the one thing you're learning you no longer need to do to survive? You don't have to share your entire story, just one thing. And read through some of the other responses because I want this to become a space where we women realize I'm not the only one rebuilding out there. And if you know another woman who is standing in the aftermath right now, please send this video to her. Let her hear these things because her Jericho may have fallen, but her story is still being written. So is yours, and so is mine. I'll see you in the next one. Have a blessed day.